Back during World War II, there was a general. His name was S.L.A. Marshall. And he did a study about soldiers in combat. And what he discovered was that everybody's scared. It just takes one person to get up out of that foxhole and charge. And if that one person will do it, then the rest of the people will follow.
Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. Looks like social media has been on fire about Epstein. Everybody on social media has an angle. Was he controlled by Mossad and Israel is in it? Israel's now paying influencers to visit Israel. And Bibi showed up on a podcast, and now they admit they were giving Israel talking points, and the crowd goes wild. A couple of kids stumbled into it when they interviewed Netanyahu. Yahoo! So, in all of this, everybody is calling people, well, you're an anti-Semite. Well, you hate Jews. Well, I love Jews. I'm not an anti-Semite. Well, you're a Zionist then. No, I'm not a Zionist. So, yeah, there's a lot of confusion, but are you aware of the fact of what anti-Semite really means? What is a Semite? And when did the word Zionist start happening? So, let's have a recap. The U.S. lost the war with the British, so essentially we're all British. Top of the morning to you, London. So how does this all add up? Well, let's speak to the character of these people first. I'm here to say that Israel is nothing but an outpost of the United States. And there's a lot of things these people have in common. The U.S. ranks the highest in crimes against children in terms of both trafficking and child pornography incidents and reporting. The United Kingdom, good morning, London again, you generally fall second with fewer per capita self-reported offenses, but still high levels of abuse and reporting. And Israel comes in third in this group, but Israel's a little bit tougher to deal with because limited public data. But if you have eyes of your own, you can see a lot of abuse must be going on when in Israel, according to them, from their own lips, they were fighting over their right to go in and rape the male prisoners. They have a lot of issues, right? So this speaks to their characteristic. Israel is packed with the Ashkenazi Jews, the name the Gypsies are currently under, also known as the Zionists. They have huge issues with their own DNA, yet they want to wipe out our DNA. I've talked about this in the past, and I put a clip down below. This Ashkenazi Jews were having incest, and that is how they ended up with all of these DNA issues. So that is how that got going. And what are their plans now? Well, they're trying to expand Israel, and essentially Gaza is their first port of this. So if the world watches them wipe out Gaza, well, then I guess they figure the world will watch them wipe out the rest of the Middle East. So I'll be playing some clips in a bit. What has been said about the United States in the Middle East for a very long time? They call the United States the Great Satan. They call Israel the Little Satan. Well, let's take a look. Is any of this true? Well, first of all, we've got Israel. That refers to Isis, Ra, and Elohim. Well, Isis is all over the Middle East, right? Funny how that's working out. So in the last show, I mentioned that I had something to talk about as far as languages. So this show is going to be about those languages and how they cooked up these languages. Seems like a lot of suspicious times going on here. So because Israel is derived from the Hebrew name. So just keep that in mind. Hebrew, okay? So what is a controlled state? The U.S. and Israel. I think they sat around and likely as simple as this. Hey, why not? We can cook up this story about Jesus as being from that region to get our way in. Hey, we got all those Muslims over there in the Middle East. How are we going to get in the middle of all those Muslims so we can cause mayhem and murder as many of them as we can? Hey, I got it. we'll claim that Jesus came from Israel, and then we'll go and get that land, and then we can move in our buddies from Israel and act like they're a different country, and then eventually we can occupy all of our neighbors. See how this will all work out? It is simply a outpost of the United States and the war efforts going on. This is the end chapter. They likely said, hey, those Muslims, they got to go. It's our DNA they feel they need to destroy. And I find that so ironic considering how filthy their DNA is, loaded with disease and all kinds of things. So it's funny how they would say that our DNA must go when their DNA is so corroded, but I won't get too engaged in that today. So this is about how it works. It's called a kill box. And they sat around when they were scrambling the Middle East during the 1920s, during Sykes-Picot. They just thought, hey, if we put one of us in the middle of all this kill box, we can kill more. Then they invented Jews and Israel. They both funded and started Hamas. So it's their foil. So today they're talking about pulling out of the peace talks and blaming Hamas. And when you hear this clip in a bit, Netanyahu, they always want to blame Hamas. Well, Hamas was created 100% by the United States and Israel. And I've also put links to that. I've talked about this in the past. I put links to that below. If you're confused, take a look. The United States runs Hamas, Hezbollah, and Al Qaeda. That is exactly how it works. You could always rely on them to say, well, we got to cancel these peace talks because we don't like their way Hamas is talking. Well, that is really code for, hey, let's get the killing going. Let's keep it going. We got an opening here. Keep going. Keep telling them we're talking about helping them, but really we're plotting to murder them. That is exactly how it all works. That is exactly how it all works. So years ago, I read this interesting book. You know, back in the days, we used to actually go out and buy books and read them. There was a linguist named Deborah Tannen. She stuck on my mind. She was out of Georgetown University, so I won't hold that against her, but she argued in her book, The Argument Culture, that American public discourse is dominated by an aggressive, adversarial style in politics, media, education, and daily conversations. And some of the key themes from her book were the way we use war metaphors. War metaphors dominate communication. Phrases like battling cancer, culture wars, or war on drugs reflect and reinforce a mindset of conflict. The United States engages heavily into two-sided debates which oversimplify issues. Complex topics get reduced to binary oppositions, pro-lifers versus pro-choice, ignoring nuance or middle ground. The media amplifies polarization. News and talk shows often stage opposing views to create drama, not understanding. This rewards extreme voices rather than thoughtful discussion. So instead of seeking solutions or common ground, people argue to win, reinforcing division. So Tannen's core argument was this: we need to shift from argument culture to dialogue culture, fostering understanding, empathy, and constructive engagement. Well, she was way ahead of her time. So the patterns Tannen described in the 1990s have intensified with cable news debates, social media outrage cycles, partisan political gridlocks. The argument culture she warned about now permeates not just national debates, but also interpersonal relationships, and community life. So that just gives us a little basis because it's easy for all of us to say, look at all of them. They're pointing their fingers at everybody else. But when we're saying that, we're essentially pointing our fingers back at ourselves and at them at the same time. So possibly we might want to put this into our thinking. The next time a conversation comes up, try to present the logic in a calm manner with the facts. And today we're definitely going to be talking about the facts about all this anti-Semitism that's running wild. But before I get started, a new development, ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is bigger than most countries, their enforcement capabilities, they have directed agents to put ankle monitors on as many migrants enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program as possible, potentially shackling up tens of thousands of people, according to a new report. The Washington Post noted that an agency memo from June urged agents to put ankle monitors on migrants whenever possible. It added that there are about 183,000 adults enrolled in the program who at some point consented to some form of tracking or mandatory check-ins while waiting for their cases to be solved. Now there are about 24,000 people who are wearing ankle monitors. So this is the first step. And for all of those people divided amongst themselves saying, yeah, we voted for those, we're glad to see it happen, keep in mind, you will be next. This is the slippery slope with all these laws and deals. Who would have thought when they signed up for the post 9/11 thing, right? Well, I'm now being monitored by gang stalking people in my area from things set up during that exact thing. So when you cheer for somebody else getting into trouble, you may want to just stop and reflect for just a couple minutes there. So anyway, so it looks like you've got lots and lots of people. So what is this ankle shacking like? Well, shackling slaves. So slaves wore shackles, iron collars, leg chains used to control enslaved people. Now, immigration enforcement uses ankle monitors with GPS track. They track non-citizens and restrict movements. Well, for right now, they're tracking non-citizens. Just pay attention. Slaves also required papers to move with check-ins. Migrants must check in, report locations, and comply with ICE. Back in the slave days, it was enforced by slave catchers and bounty hunters. Well, this is also the same. It's enforced by ICE agents, tech companies, and private contractors. And yes, personal bounty hunters are also part of the ICE thing. The slavery issue was about public humiliation and constant fear. Well, ICE is about social stigma, tech surveillance, and fear of deportation. Though legally and operationally different, the emotion, symbolic, and power-related effects can be quite similar. So shackling up people is not a good thing. There's a lot of private prisons being built in this country to take care of those shackled up people, right? Well, soon we'll all be shackled up if everybody continues to sit and watch. So they use the shackling, they're back in the shackling, just like they use the Gilded Age. Now we're back at the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is really when they took over. So how did they start shackling these migrants? Well, that was quite simple. They came up with the Laken-Riley Act. That was introduced in 2024 following the tragic murder of Laken Riley, allegedly by an undocumented migrant. It passed in the House of Representatives with Republican support and some bipartisan votes. So, allegedly, and I don't believe this is true for a minute, and I mean no disrespect if this was true, but I don't believe that this Laken Riley person, well, maybe somebody got murdered, okay? I'll concede to that. But there's always a cause and effect, right? So, the key provisions for this thing mandates that ICE detention of undocumented immigrants accused, and that's the key word here, accused of theft or other crimes, but not just convicted. It penalizes jurisdictions that do not comply with ICE detainer requests, the so-called sanctuary cities. The namesake, Laken Riley, was a 22-year-old nursing student killed in Georgia, and the suspect was a Venezuelan national released under Biden-era parole policy. So here's where the language gets confusing. They wrote the word accused The act uses the word accused, not convicted, which means no trial, no verdict is necessary. This broadens ICE authority significantly. It encourages over-reporting or false reporting. If being accused alone is enough to warrant detention, this could incentivize malicious reporting or weaponized accusations. It could lead to racial profiling and community distrust. It creates a chilling effect where undocumented individuals avoid police, hospitals, or schools out of fear. So the U.S. law is built. It's hard to say these things and be serious. The U.S. law is built on the presumption of innocence, which is actually quite the opposite. When we go into a court, we're actually going in with the assumption that we're guilty. Everything has been flipped. So detaining individuals based solely on accusations bypasses constitutional protections. It sure does, doesn't it? It undermines due process. So it expands ICE power without oversight. The act could vastly increase ICE's discretionary power without parallel accountability mechanisms or legal recourse for wrongly detained persons. So yes, ICE is like no bueno. So let's get going on the thing for today. I'm going to be talking about Benjamin Netanyahu interview. He interviewed a couple of kids called the NELK, NELK Boys. And I watched the interview. I watched these NELK Boys. They're big social media stars. They have millions of views. They're the MAGA kids. You know, what people are missing in all this is these are controlled opposition people. These aren't just some random kids out there. And I bet anything, I'd bet the farm on the fact that if anybody dug into who these kids are, you'd probably find their parents are probably some high-level Zionists, right? So so evidently these kids were set up with an interview for Netanyahu. So how did these two kids on social media get this interview with Netanyahu? Well, when I was listening to them talking, in one of their quotes, they said the White House, yes, the U.S. White House contacted them and asked them if they wanted to interview Netanyahu. So clearly, the White House, with their buddies or their co-op people from Israel, worked on this together. So it didn't go well for these kids because their audience blew the tops of their heads off. They were saying things like this: we have all been seeing children being burnt alive, starved, organs ripped out of their bodies, children without heads. And you're asking this wanted war criminal about McDonald's? Shame on you. Shame, shame, you're done. You just got used. Which reminds me of a quote: never ask a woman her age, a man his salary, or Israel for their evidence. So I'll be playing some clips in a bit, but I'd like to point you to a couple of links that I have down below that I won't be covering because Hamas was created by the USA. So how did Hamas manage to amass so much wealth and military capability? Well, supposedly Hamas is sitting on individual people like $11 billion. So Hamas isn't what they're saying. We go, Hamas, we got to stop it because Hamas is forcing them. Well, that's like me coming up with my evil twin sister, and I'll call her Diney, and I'll say, well, Diney wasn't around when I needed to do this, so she must have done it on my behalf, just completely obliterating the fact that you're both people, right? So let's talk about this phrase, Great Satan. Where'd that come from? So Great Satan was a term used by Khomeini and Iranian clerics to describe the United States, especially after the U.S. supported the Shah of Iran and was seen as imperialist, corrupt, and morally decadent. They refer to Israel as Little Satan, viewed by revolutionary Iran as an illegitimate state allied with U.S. interests in the Middle East. Well, it is an illegitimate state. It's not only just allied with U.S. interests, it is the United States. So let's start off with how these lies about how they even get that land over there, right? Well, they used a lot of manipulation. But first, my favorite one is Anne Frank. Anne Frank. So Anne Frank, it's called the Anne Frank Fonds. It's based in Switzerland. Well, of course, was established by Otto Frank to receive all royalties from the diary, revised editions, translations, and adaptations after his death in 1980. So Anne Frank's dad was named Otto Frank. And here's where the story gets funny. So from those royalties, the foundation distributes income to education and charitable causes worldwide. Sounds pretty good, right? In recent years, the foundation has donated about 1.5 million US dollars annually to UNICEF, education programs, a medical fund for Gentile rescuers, and other causes. So lots and lots of money around that little book about that girl, Anne Frank, right? Well, the name Frank, remember they have the Frank movement, so I'm pretty sure that's where the name came from. So while the diary has sold millions of copies and translated into dozens of languages, no public figure exists for the total accumulated income across all editions and licenses. So given average royalty rates and the 30 million plus sales, total gross earnings might be estimated in the tens of billions of dollars, but such estimates would be speculative. So the Anne Frank Fonds, it's called the Anne Frank Fonds, FONDS, has consistently emphasized that all proceeds serve charitable and educational purposes, not personal profit. So let's take a look. So, of course, they haven't disclosed how much they've made over the years, right? So, while there is no precise publicly available total of lifetime earnings from the Diary of Anne Frank, its massive sales and licensing, including in print, translations, and adaptations, have generated significant royalties. I mean, it's a lot if every year they're giving out 1.5 million, right? So, who was Anne Frank? Anneliese Marie Frank was a German-born Jewish girl and diarist. She gained worldwide fame posthumously for keeping a diary documenting her life in hiding during the German occupation of the Netherlands. Well, of course, it's the Netherlands, right? Good morning, Brussels. Good morning, you gang over there. In the diary, she regularly described her family's everyday life in their hiding place in an Amsterdam attic from 1942 until their arrest in 1944. Anne Frank was born in Frankfurt, Germany, in 1929. In 1934, 1929 was the same year my mom was born, okay? In 1934, when she was 4.5, Frank and her family moved to Amsterdam in the Netherlands after Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party gained control over Germany. By May 1940, the family was trapped in Amsterdam by the German occupation. And you'll see why I'm laughing in the video, okay? It's actually, well, it's a pretty funny story about deception, okay? So you have to hand it to these people how far they will go to deceive us. So anyhow, so they moved to so by May 1940, the family was trapped in Amsterdam by the German occupation of the Netherlands. Frank lost her German citizenship in 1941 and became stateless. Now, I don't know what that has to do with anything, but that's what it says. Despite spending most of her life in the Netherlands and being a de facto Dutch national, she never officially became a Dutch citizen. As persecutions of the Jewish population increased in July 1942, the family went into hiding in rooms concealed behind a bookcase in the building where Anne Frank's father, Otto Frank, worked. The family was arrested 2 years later by the Gestapo, and listen to this, on the 4th of August, 1944. So here's the origins and the authorship. This is the claim. Anne Frank wrote the diary herself while hiding from the Nazis in Amsterdam between 1942 and 1944. The writings were in Dutch, which is pretty interesting considering she was German, right? So Anne Frank could all of a sudden, as a young kid, I think she was a teenager, she's now writing in Dutch. Okay, so I guess she learned Dutch pretty quickly there. So she used several notebooks and loose sheets, and she herself revised and edited the material. So this is what historians refer to as versions A and B, okay? After the war, her father, Otto Frank, the only surviving member of the family, compiled these manuscripts into a version, and this they're calling version C, which was edited for grammar, readability, and content, removing things like sexual references and criticisms of her mother. It's another strange thing, right? So there enters this picture, this person named Meyer Levine. Meyer Levine comes into the picture, and he's a Jewish American journalist and writer, and was deeply moved by the diary and believed it had universal significance. So Otto Frank, now remember, Anne is dead by this point. She died of tetanus or whatever supposedly in the camp. So Otto Frank gave Meyer Levine his permission to write a dramatic adaptation, and Levine produced a script in 1952. However, Otto later rejected Levine's version, believing it was too focused on Jewish identity and suffering, and instead authored a different adaptation by Francis Goodrich and Albert Hacken. This became the famous Broadway play of 1955 and film of 1959. But Levin had to sue Otto Frank for breach of contract, claiming he had been misled, and he actually won a $50,000 settlement. So there's this thing called the ballpoint pen controversy. In the 1980s, a report by the German Federal Criminal Police Office, or the BKA, noted that some annotations and pages in the published diary written in ballpoint pen, which didn't exist during Anne's lifetime, which was because ballpoint pens weren't introduced until the late 1940s. So these ballpoint pen editions were not part of the original diary text, but rather editorial notes and possibly later annotations made by others, likely during preservation or public preparation. So, forensic studies by the Netherlands Institute for War Documentation and others confirmed that the main body of the diary was written in ink and pencil that were available in the 1940s. So, Otto Frank gave the original manuscript to the Netherlands Institute for War Documentation in the 1980s. So, a comprehensive forensic investigation concluded in 1986 that the diary was genuinely written by Anne Frank, but Otto Frank had edited and compiled different versions for publication, but did not fabricate the core text. See how those words are getting kind of tricky here? So let me read you this article. I found this article. Well, I'm still laughing today, okay? So the article is called Clever Jew made millions from dead daughter by Dr. William Pierce. Tucked away on pages 119 and 122 of the October 6th issue of Der Spiegel, a weekly German news magazine comparable to Time or Newsweek, was a news item of considerable significance. A scientific analysis of the manuscript purported to be the original diary of Anne Frank, a Jewish girl who died in a German concentration camp during the Second World War, has revealed that the manuscript could not have been written before 1951, 6 years after the end of the war. The significance of Der Spiegel's revelation of this fraud is twofold. First, the printing of the story in a mass circulation publication constitutes a major break with past treatment of similar news. The German news media, though not under the Jewish monopoly control which blights the media in this country, generally follow a pro-Jewish line, a heritage from the immediate post-war years when the Allied occupation forces gave publishing licenses only to those Germans who had proved their disloyalty to their country during the war. Consequently, most news tends to cast doubt on Jewish stories about gas chambers and the like from the World War II era, has either been blackened out altogether or downplayed and given very unsympathetic treatment. The present article, though, accompanied by copious apologies and held back for 6 months after it became news, would not have been printed at all a year or two ago. Beyond this, the exposure of the Anne Frank forgery is important because of the sheer magnitude of the fraud and the key role it has played in underpinning the entire Jewish scenario of the war. What is known as a fact is that one Otto Frank, a Jewish merchant formerly of Frankfurt, who had been arrested in the Netherlands and interned in the Auschwitz concentration camp during the war, began visiting publishers in 1946 with what he claimed was a diary written by his young daughter during the time the Frank family was hiding from the German police in occupied Holland. The girl later perished at Auschwitz, Frank said. The diary, filled with touching adolescence reveries and homely little anecdotes, was exactly what the Jewish Holocaust propagandists were looking for, a highly effective piece of ammunition to generate a maudlin, emotion-laden sympathy for the poor, persecuted Jews, as typified by Anne Frank, and generate hatred against the wicked Germans who had killed her and 6 million other Jews. Otto Frank cashed in on the diary in a big way. Not only did he find a publisher, but he found people hot to buy stage and film rights as well. Shortly after its appearance in book form, the diary had been translated into a score of languages and printed in millions of copies, from all of which Frank received royalties. The English version alone, under the title Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, has sold more than, I think it's like 4 million or trillion copies to date. A television dramatization based on the diary was aired in this country last month, accompanied by the usual hullabaloo. Almost from the beginning, there were charges that the diary was a hoax. Some of these charges were based on the gross inconsistencies between various translations and editions of the book in the book form. It was clear the text had been heavily edited to help it sell well in different markets. Other charges were based on internal inconsistencies, incredulity, straining statements in the diary itself. And then there was the matter of the script for the film version of the diary. Otto Frank was sued by a New York scriptwriter, Meyer Levine, who claimed that Frank had taken large portions. So Meyer Levine claimed that Frank had taken large portions of the script Levine had written and had not paid Levine for his work. The court ordered Frank to pay Levine $50,000. One can easily understand why some observers began to wonder how much, if any, of the content of the various Anne Frank books, films, and plays in circulation was actually written by a little Jewish girl named Anne Frank. So, in Germany, however, it was not wise to speculate about such matters publicly. The line laid down by the government and the media is that Anne Frank is gospel, and anyone who suggests otherwise leaves himself open to criminal charges, defaming the victims of Nazi persecution, as well as civil suits. Otto Frank himself made a regular habit of hauling Anne Frank detractors into German courts, which inevitably decided in his favor until recently, that is. When Hamburg pensioner Ernst Romer, 76, began spreading the accusations that Otto Frank had himself written what he was passing off as his dead daughter's diary, Frank sued him. As usual, the court upheld the authenticity of the diary. Handwriting experts testified that the entire diary, including loose notes and inserts, had been written by the same hand, and that hand was Anne Frank's. Romer appealed the court's decision against him, and more handwriting experts were called in. Their conclusions were the same. Everything in the diary was in the same handwriting. There was no forgery. And you gotta hand it to this guy, Romer. Romer appealed again, and this time the court asked the technical services of the Federal Crime Office, similar to our FBI, which carried out a careful analysis of the original manuscript of the diary with microscope and ultraviolet illumination in order to confirm its authenticity, in particular to determine when it was written. The report of the technical experts was given to the court in April of this year, and it contained a bombshell. Large portions of the alleged diary were written in ballpoint pen, which was not manufactured prior to 1951. Were it not for the previous testimony of the handwriting experts that the entire diary, including the portions written with ballpoint pen, is in the same hand, the father might have claimed that he only edited his daughter's work, clarifying passages here and there, but the evidence was quite unambiguous. For example, the testimony of Hamburg graphologist Mina Becker in an earlier trial was this: the handwriting of the diary in those 3 bound volumes, including all notes and additions on the glued-in pages, as well as the 338 pages of loose material, including all corrections and insertions, is identical. Otto should have been more careful in his choice of writing instruments. It is now quite clear that he finished hooking up the original of the diary after he had found a publisher for what in 1946 was nothing more than some rough notes and an idea in his head which seemed to have prospects for making a lot of money with little effort. First, a typescript for the publisher, and then, as sales of the book began to mount, a completed handwritten original is shown to doubters. Just after the report of the Federal Crime Office was given to the court, Otto Frank conveniently died before he could be asked a number of very interesting questions. Meanwhile, the worldwide Jewish propaganda apparatus has continued its promotion of the Anne Frank myth as if nothing had happened. Der Spiegel seems to be the only mass circulation news periodical to have exposed the fraud to date. And I gotta tell you, I'll read you one more article because this one was pretty funny. Serious Story of Anne Frank. Seriously, not even funny. By Andrew Ogden, the UNS Report. Last week, I wrote an article about some Anne Frank gibberish, and I included some jokey language, which is not precisely correct. In particular, the alleged diary was not largely written in ballpoint pen. It was largely edited in ballpoint pen, with notes and additions added in ballpoint pen. The ballpoint thing is kind of a meme, but I don't want to be accused of misrepresenting the truth or have people repeating something that isn't exactly correct, so I feel I need to clarify. In general, I probably need to be more clear about what is true and what is jokes, as the difference is something a bit esoteric as in this case. Basically, several people who thought the diary was fake complained that the manuscripts, there are two of them, because while hiding from Nazi killers, this 13-year-old Jew girl was editing her materials for publishing, had been partially written in ballpoint, and the court decided that her father just cleaned up the manuscripts before publishing using a ballpoint pen. In theory, her father heavily edited the diary for publication doesn't necessarily mean it's fake. As far as the level of editing or additions by her father that they admit to, Otto Frank is legally the co-author of the book. The Jews claim he is not really the co-author. They just said that because they are greedy and wanted to hold on to the copyright. That whole part of the story is very strange. The story is that Anne's father, Otto Frank, found the text when he went to the attic she was living in after the war. He just found it lying there. Then it made him very rich. Before Sandy Hook, he definitely had the record for making the most money off a dead child. There is no proof that the diary was authentic, and there is no way there could be proof. I don't think it is real because it is just a little too convenient, and the writing is not something that you would expect from a 13-year-old girl. But again, the ballpoint thing is not really a kill shot. When the Jews claim the diary is real, they claim that a court found that the handwriting is the same throughout the manuscripts. However, there is no writing sample from Anne to compare to. Conveniently, they do not have any of her school assignments or anything of that nature to use as a baseline for her handwriting. It comes down to whether or not you believe her Jew father found and then heavily edited a real diary. And if you believe that, Anne thought the diary would be published and therefore wrote two separate manuscripts. I don't believe that, but someone could believe that, and it wouldn't make the Holocaust true. Ultimately, I have to just say, attacking Anne Frank's diary as a fraud is not the best way to attack the Holocaust as a fraud. There are too many other aspects to focus on, and really, all you're saying is, I don't believe her father, even though this story is technically plausible. Many, many other stories from the Holocaust narrative are not plausible. What's more, whether or not the diary is real, again, they claim it is partially real since they say it is heavily edited to the point of a co-author credit by her father. It is obviously used as an emotional tool to manipulate school children into believing in the Holocaust narrative. Even if the book is taken straightforwardly, it does not prove a Holocaust. I think it's funny to say that Anne Frank's diary is fake and to keep bringing up ballpoint pens. But this is not really a serious argument. And I think in my previous piece, I probably didn't make the jokes clear enough for the people who don't know the full background here. This is a joke. Me. Anne Frank's diary is fake. Them. Oh my God, how can you say this blasphemy? Me. Well, for starters, the writing is in ballpoint pen. Them. Oh my God, no. Her father only edited in ballpoint pen and added some parts. Me. Did he add the part about her being a lesbian? Them. Oh my God, I don't know if he added that part specifically. Me. It would be pretty weird if he did it though, right? Them. No. As far as Otto being sued for copyright violation over the diary, that claim is also sort of wrong. Otto commissioned a play to be written based on the diary because he was trying to max out this typist child corpse profits. And then he refused to pay the guy he hired to write the play and was sued and forced to pay the writer $50,000. The man suing him was not claiming to be the writer of the diary itself, but of a play based on it. This speaks to the character and business practices of Otto Frank, but does not prove anything else. In serious Holocaust denial, it's much better to focus on the testimony from the Nuremberg trials, because that is what the Nazis were convicted on, and this is considered official, legally proven history. Even stuff like, I escaped the masturbation machines and was then raised by wolves is not hard proof that Nazism was a hoax, because that was written in memoirs that were never used in court. And when you get down in the weeds with these Jews, they will say, well, of course a lot of Jews wrote fake books about the Holocaust to make money. The Nuremberg testimony is the official story, which they tried and executed people based on. And that is all demonstrably retarded and fake. The Nuremberg trials are relevant these days as it was the first time in the history of the Western legal system, going back to ancient Greece and even before summer, that people were convicted of serious crimes without any physical evidence, based solely on eyewitness testimony. This is what is happening with the rape hoaxes of Weinstein and all of them, soon to be brand now. Here's one of my favorite documentaries of the Holocaust hoax, which includes a lot about the Nuremberg trials and the stories they were told. The bottom line is this: there was no systematic plan to exterminate all the Jews. A lot of Jews died, and at some point during the end of the war, some people from the German military might have just been killing Jews because, seriously, fuck these people. At least you can't totally disprove this wasn't happening on the Eastern Front. If it was happening, the scale was irrelevant, and also all kinds of people got killed during that war. The hero of the Ukraine, Stefan Bandera, was openly attempting a genocide against Polish peasants in the Ukraine, just going to farms and slaughtering people for no reason. There is a guy the U.S. backs as a hero, while sometimes also falsely claiming he was a Nazi, which he definitely was not. So that's a lot worse than Germans killing Jews who maybe hadn't been convicted of being partisans because they were likely or considered to be likely to become partisans and attack the rear flank. If that even happened, which isn't really proven. Fake shower rooms, gas chambers are a hoax, just like electric floor chambers and diesel engine smoke chambers. Also, how many Jews died? There was no systematic extermination plan. Also, the Red Cross numbers are real. The Jewish census numbers are real. There is too much real stuff to focus on questionable material surrounding ballpoint pens. Of course, it probably doesn't even matter, because even if the Holocaust did happen, it's like, okay, well, and the Jews will never try to explain why everyone is always trying to exterminate them. which seems like a pretty relevant question when they are going around claiming this constantly. I mean, if one of your friends comes to you and tells you that everywhere he goes, people are trying to kill him, before asking for proof of the claim, you're going to ask why. If his answer is for no reason, then there are a lot of other questions that come up following two paths. Is this real? If it is real, why did you go and make all these people want to kill you? It is only the Jews that can get away with everywhere I go, people are trying to kill us for no reason. And remember this, Anne Frank died of typhus. So, I also have down below, there were quite a few other books written during the Holocaust that were also proven to be fake. They had ones called, let me see here, the very lurid one called The Painted Bird, another one called Fragments. So yeah, there have been a lot of questionable books about the Holocaust. So let me scroll down here for a second. So yeah, I have the whole list down below, and let me see here. So yeah, they obviously sold a lot of books about the Holocaust. It's always about the money in the end, right? So um So the Nuremberg trial is staged with Stevens' propaganda film to present the U.S. and British Empire as moral victors and to give the populations false hope the perpetrators of the Holocaust were punished. So yeah, that's exactly what the Nuremberg trials were all about, because it wasn't about evidence, it was about accusations, and that therein lies the difference, right? So how did we get this buildup going towards World War II, excuse me? Well, first we had the B'nai B'rith. They founded the Anti-Defamation League in 1913. I'm kind of getting ahead of the game, right? In 1919, Rudolph of the Thule Society founds the Bavarian with the large group. Members of this group were Heimlich Hemmer. So the whole group got together around 1919. In 1920, M16 spreads the Protocol of Elders of Zion in the Times. It was officially spread in the official London paper. 1923, 1925, Bear, the people who ended up murdering a lot of people, Bear merges. So, yeah, there was a lot going on leading up to the war. So, people have said that Protocol of the Elders is not true. Well, I believe it is true. It was actually promoted by Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler promoted the Protocols, which was announcing the Antichrist in Mein Kampf. And Mein Kampf, remember, was written by the Jesuits. So in 1927, the New York Times used the phrase 6 million Jews. 1933, National Boycott against Jews by Adolf Hitler. So yeah, they were working up to it. The Protocols of the Elders, just a reminder, that was a document that came out of Russia. I did a whole show about it, and I believe it to be true. So, the protocols do not explicitly refer to the Antichrist. They describe a world domination plan involving manipulation, politics, finance, education, and media. So, yeah, so they were planning for quite a long time. So Hitler was the one who promoted the protocols. Let's see here. So, origins of Holocaust education. You realize the Holocaust is the only event that is forced by law. Forced by law, okay? So when did it all start? So remember, before around the 1960s, I just talked about it in a recent show, the Catholic Church was blaming the Jews for killing Jesus up until the 1960s, right? So pre-1960s, the Catholic Church had long promoted the deicide claim that Jews were responsible for killing Jesus. So in 1949, a French Jewish historian personally urged Pope Pius to address Christian anti-Semitism. So they're already talking about it in 1949. So, 1962 to 1965, the Second Vatican Council. So that was the one about they helped rescue Jews during World War II. And that was what resulted in that 1965 article that rejected the idea that Jews were collectively guilty of Jesus' death. And it called for dialogue and respect between Catholics and Jews. So, who first proposed Holocaust education? In 1961, Adolf Eichmann. There was a trial in Jerusalem, broadcast globally, brought survivor testimony to the world's attention, pushed Holocaust memory into global consciousness. So, we had the American Jewish Committee, or the AJC. It pushed public education, teacher materials, fought denial, promoted exclusion in textbooks. They used the World Jewish Congress, was founded in 1953. International lobbying and memorial efforts, research, survival records, teacher training. And then, of course, we had the Simon Wiesenthal Center, founded in 1977. That was a big, we're going to look for all the people that hurt the Jews. So, this has been going on for quite a long time, starting in 1973. The first formal public school curriculum on the Holocaust happened in New York City. 1978, President Jimmy Carter forms the President's Commission on the Holocaust, chaired by Ezel Wiesel. In 1980, Congress passes laws creating the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council. 1993, the opening of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. 2005, U.S. declares January 27th, Auschwitz Liberation, as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Now, keep in mind, no one is saying that people didn't die in concentration camps, okay? That is not nothing that I have ever mentioned. No one denies that fact. But how they died, who died, and where they died are pretty big questions, right? So, yeah, so right about that time, they started coming up with all the laws, right? They wanted to combat anti-Semitism, to educate the public to prevent future hatred. Anti-Semitism cultural memory moral education, to preserve testimony of survivors before it was lost. Frame the Holocaust as a universal warning against genocide. Reinforce political legitimacy of Israel as a post-Holocaust refugee. So, in summary, the 1960s were pretty pivotal, if you ask me. The Catholic Church reversals centuries of anti-Semitic doctrine, while Jewish organizations began pushing for formal Holocaust education in schools. The Eichmann trial in 1961, survivor activism, and institutional lobbying led to official U.S. federal action by 1978. So we have the key groups, the AJC, ADL, WJC, Simon Wiesel Center, and later the U.S. HMM and Facing History. So quite a plot got going, right? And I'm going to be going next into where did the history of anti-Semitism happen? The word is the trick. Okay, so I'm going to be taking a break here, and I have some fantastic clips. There's quite a few of them, but they tell this picture. And the first clip I did, I did a portion of that interview that Benjamin Netanyahu did with those NELK Boys. And just pay attention to his wording, how he talks about the closeness of the United States and Israel. The next clip will be about the Bibi family. It's a timeline of Benjamin Netanyahu's history of scandals. The next clip will be about the Bibi family episodes of Sarah Netanyahu, his wife, the most hated woman in Israel. People do not like these people. So another clip is What is the Greater Israel? Pay very close attention. This is the plan they have been pushing. It's called the Greater Israel, and that is where they plan to wipe out all of their neighbors. And it will close with Gaza citizens suffer rising death tolls. So that clip will be playing right now. And also, one clip that will also be playing that I want you to pay attention to: why Israel kidnaps children, Jewish ones. Well, why couldn't the Ashkenazi Jews have their own children at this point? Well, I would have to argue because at that point they were likely all transgendering themselves. That's where they came up with all these diseases from. So around that point, they probably started the heavy transgendering of their own people, these Ashkenazis. So as they started transgendering themselves, well, they could no longer start to have children. So they started stealing children. Well, they stole a lot of Jewish children from the area. So what this means is this: there's a lot of children now in Israel that are now adults who are fighting against their own people. They don't know that they were stolen. So they always have to steal children to populate because they can't have their own children because of what they're doing to themselves hormonally with all this transgender business. I played a clip about that in the past. They're trying to warn other Ashkenazis of all of these deals they have with their genetics. So that's the catch of this whole thing, right? They're out to destroy our DNA, but yet they have the filthy, the absolutely filthy, perverted DNA that is loaded with disease themselves. So that's how that all works. So I'll be back with this other fascinating part about how did this anti-Semitism even get started and what does it actually mean? And let's all try to learn to do better and actually know when we say things that we're repeating the correct information. And this show will help define all that. So I will be back in a bit.
The things that are important. So it's been an incredible partnership, both personally, but also for our two nations.
Did you have any type of relationship with Biden?
Not the same. I've known Biden for, 40 years? Almost as long. Well, both of them. Over the decades, it was a different relationship. It was a friendship, but also it evolved into, how shall I say this? Severe disagreements.
Mm.
And with Donald Trump, we've had powerful agreements. And where there's no daylight between an American president and an Israeli prime minister, amazing things can happen. Like our common enemies who chant death to Israel, death to America, and want to develop atomic bombs and the means to deliver them to this city and to every part of America. All of a sudden, they're not so intimidating. All of a sudden, we can defeat them. All of a sudden, you can use these brave American pilots who come from around the world, drop it right over the bunker, and help us end the amazing feats of our soldiers and pilots. That's an amazing thing. It's good for America. It's good for the security of every single American.
How do you feel about the Americans' opinion on Israel right now?
Well, look, I think the broad segments of the American public support Israel, but I'm concerned that the young people in America, some of them are getting the wrong picture of Israel, vilification, demonization. You can feed them a lot of lies. So the only way you can fight lies is with the truth. How do you fight lies? You tell the truth. And you have to tell it as often and as, intensely as the lies that are leveled against you. And that requires an effort. It's like another battlefield, you know?
Mm.
And I'm doing this podcast, among other things, to reach young people.
Of course.
You guys are pretty young. I mean,
30 years old.
30.
30.
That's young.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest misconceptions are about Israel?
Well, first of all, they don't know what kind of an open society it is, how pluralistic. I mean, we live in the heart of the Middle East, okay? Iran is not that far away. In Iran, they hang gays by cranes. In Israel, probably Tel Aviv is one of the, the most open, liberal-minded city on earth. Israel is a high.
We visited there, yeah.
No, it's completely different.
Our assistant
Women,
skate too. He had a good time.
well, you could vouch.
yeah,
okay?
no, we had all the great
So,
time.
you know, I mean, look at that. How about women? Okay. Women in Iran, they shoot the women. They shot this extraordinarily brave and beautiful woman, shot on the sidewalk because she showed too much hair. In Israel, women are, you know what women, I'll tell you what the difference is, okay? So I had this young women officer in my military secretariat. You know, the prime minister has military secretariat and usually has a general and it has staff assistants. One of the staff assistants was this young woman pilot, navigator, on leave from the Air Force to do this work in the prime minister's office. You know what she did now? She was flying over the skies of Tehran, you know, attacking this horrible regime that tyrannizes the women in Tehran. That's the difference. The women there get shot on the sidewalk, and an Israeli woman pilot helps liberate Iran, quite the women of Iran. And boy, that's a big difference. And that's true of everything. It's true of nightlife. It's true of the startup nation, the incredible ingenuity and entrepreneurship, incredible freedom. Israel is a paragon of freedom in an area that doesn't exactly enjoy freedom. And to have young Americans march and support these mass rapists, these people who beheaded men, who burned babies alive, I'm talking about the Hamas monsters, is that their ideal? They don't know nothing. I mean, they don't know what they're talking about. And I want to bring that truth to them. So Israel is a great free society and the best partner that America has anywhere on
Great
earth.
people there for sure. When we visited, everyone was so welcoming and people were inviting us over for dinner and stuff. But I see, like, that's the thing too. I'm not claiming to be an expert too, but I'll just read stuff on like X and like people will say like Israel's killing babies or like they're starving people.
That's completely false. In fact, the reason we have civilian casualties in Gaza is because Hamas, who are basically horrible murderers and killers, okay, committed to our destruction and your destruction. They say so openly. I mean, they say the big enemy, the real enemy, the great Satan is America. And Israel is the small Satan. But it's a small Satan that is standing in their way of conquering with other Iranian proxies, conquering the Middle East, and then we move on to you. So America is the great Satan, and America, needs to disappear. And we stand in their way. But one of the things you have to understand is Gaza is the densest urban environment you can find, and Hamas embeds itself in the civilian population of Gaza, the Palestinians, okay? We tell the Palestinians, hey, leave, because after they butchered us and raped our women and beheaded our men and burned our babies, we have to remove this threat. So we come in to take care of the Hamas terrorists. But the Hamas terrorists don't leave the civilian neighborhoods. And we say to the civilians, we call them up because we have their telephone numbers. We say, leave, please leave. We send them leaflets, millions of leaflets, please leave. We do everything that is possible that no army has done. They want to leave. You know what Hamas does? They shoot them. You say, we want you to stay because we want to have civilian casualties, because then they can show it on CNN or all these other networks and so on and claim that Israel is deliberately doing this. We're not deliberately doing anything. We'd like them to leave. And in fact, successively during the war, it's been now a year and a half, they finally do leave, most of them. So we've minimized those casualties, but it's not because we seek to have civilian casualties, it's because Hamas wants them. They're willing to sacrifice their own children, their own families, both because they don't really care for human life, but also because they think it's very good propaganda against us. And if they just let them leave the war zone, get to the safe parts, safe havens that we've created in Gaza, no one would be hurt. And the minute Hamas lays down its arms, surrenders, maybe we let them leave Gaza, that's the end of the war. No one gets hurt.
What would your message be to Palestinians that just want to have like a peaceful life
Get rid of Hamas. Help us get rid of Hamas. They torment you. They oppress you. They shoot you in the back of the head. If you want to leave the war zone, they kill you. And if you say a word in protest, they'll kill you. If you're gay, you're in bad shape, really bad shape. And if you are a woman, you're chattel, you're nothing. You're property. That's the opposite of everything we believe in. We, I say, it's not only Israel, it's you.
Mhm.
So we're the same.
How do you respond to, like, I'd say there's a lot of American support from the females, from the gays towards Palestine. So how does that make any sense? based
That's,
off-
gays for Gaza is like chickens for KFC. I mean, that's insane. The whole thing is absurd. Chickens for KFC, right? Gays for Gaza, or, women for the women of Gaza. What are you talking about? They're completely subjugated. They've got this death cult that is contaminated. So you can push this stuff on TikTok or whatever on the stuff, but you can't build peace or security on the rocks. They'll crash. I mean, these things will crash on the rocks of Middle Eastern realities. You can only build peace on truth and reality, not on deliberate, falsified fantasy.
Why do they say Israel's like starving the people of Gaza?
Well, because we're trying to get the food in, and we let food trucks in, and guess what happens when we let them in? Hamas steals the food, takes the good chunk for itself, then sells at inflated prices. They jack up the prices, and then they sell the food to its population, to its hungry population, if they give them at all, and then use the money that they take from their own people to recruit more killers into their terror machine. That's what happens.
Why are more Palestinians not siding with Israel against Hamas then?
Well, up to now, they've been terrorized, but guess what's happened? Since we're beating Hamas, all of a sudden we see Palestinians rising. You have to see this to believe this, okay? And they say to Hamas, hey, you're not coming into my building. You can't use my school or this hospital as your command post. We're not letting you. And they start fighting them. Now we have actually armed conflict between Palestinians and terrorists. It was unimaginable a year and a half ago. But now there are Palestinians who rise up. And, the more the better, because we can create a different future for Gaza. And we should also do something very simple that President Trump said, and it was brilliant. So that's my idea. That's how he cuts to the chase. He says, at the end of this war, the people of Gaza should have the choice. If they want to leave for other countries, they want a freedom of choice. Why are they locked in? Hell, we're not locking them in. Anybody could leave, but Hamas is locking them in. Suppose they want to leave. They want to go to another country, okay? Why shouldn't they have the freedom of choice to do that? Because this is all upside down, The victim of this horrible terrorism is called the aggressor. The people who are oppressed by Hamas are seen as supporting Hamas. Give them a choice. Give them freedom. Give them a life and give them a future. They can't have that with these Hamas stormtroopers. But the amazing thing is, I come here and I see these protests. The people who are protesting for Hamas and against Israel, they burn American flags. They not only burn the flag of Israel, they burn American flags. They're anti-American. They're not MAGA. They're not supporters. Who do they support? You know who they support? They support Iran and its proxy, Hamas or Hezbollah. What does Iran do? Just understand, people who support Iran or speak on its behalf. Iran tried to assassinate President Trump, not once, but twice.
They were behind those assassination attempts?
They openly admit. By the way, they put out a price on his head, on mine too, by the way, smaller price. I'm not offended.
They actually put a price on your head?
Yeah, 2 days ago.
Do you know what it is?
Do you know how
Yeah,
much?
it's smaller than his, naturally. He's the president of the United States, for God's sake, okay? So they put out a fatwa 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, by the official cleric of the Iranian regime that President Trump has to be assassinated and that I have to be assassinated. And by the way, they targeted Sarah, my wife was here, and they targeted our bedroom window. Yeah, we were supposed to be there. They hit through their proxy Hezbollah. They fired a drone right into our bedroom window. So
Just
maybe-
recently?
Oh yeah, it was a couple of months ago. Yeah.
Wow.
No, it was a year ago actually. Yeah, a year ago. Okay. So how many months? 7 months ago. She counts, you know. Yeah, so they tried to assassinate President Trump twice. They've killed and injured thousands of Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. They bombed American embassies. They murdered 241 Marines in Beirut. They chant death to America, death to Israel. They're out to get America. They were building atomic bombs and intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's their plan to reach America. So do you want these mad ayatollahs to have that power? Of course not. So they're anti-American, they're anti-Israel. And the guys who protest, and many of them are paid and organized by foreign NGOs, bad people. They're out against America. They hate Israel because they see Israel as part of America. And in many ways, they're right.
I'm just trying to figure it out too, because even in New York City, right? What's Zoran?
Yeah.
He's an anti-Semitic guy.
Yeah.
I think the highest population of Jews in New York City.
This is Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving prime minister who's been in power for over 17 years. He's a divisive figure who is praised by his loyalists but condemned by pretty much everyone else. Behind his iron grip on Israeli politics lies a long history of scandals that leads up to his current situation, one in which he is facing multiple corruption charges in 3 separate cases filed in 2019, which include allegations of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Add to that the recent accusations of war crimes he's charged with for leading Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, which has killed over 46,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children. These accusations are so serious that the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for him. Critics say Netanyahu has been using Israel's Gaza offensive as a means of pivoting away from his legal troubles that could potentially end his government coalition and land him in jail. Here's a timeline of scandals Netanyahu has been involved in. Netanyahu became Israel's prime minister in 1996, and within just 1 year, he was embroiled in his first political scandal. In 1997, Aryeh Deri, leader of Israel's ultra-Orthodox Shas party and Netanyahu's coalition partner, was on trial for corruption. Deri pressured his ally Netanyahu to appoint a barely qualified lawyer named Roni Baran as Attorney General, hoping the new appointee would ensure him a favorable plea bargain. It is alleged that Deri threatened to derail the Israeli-Palestinian Hebron Agreement unless Netanyahu complied. Netanyahu did cave, but backlash from politicians and jurists forced Baran to resign within just 48 hours. The scandal caused public outrage and led to a police investigation that concluded charges be brought against all parties involved. Netanyahu denied any wrongdoing, but admitted he made mistakes. Eventually, Deri was the only one indicted. During the 90s, rumors began circulating that Netanyahu was romantically involved with his image consultant, a married woman named Ruth Bar, and that a sex tape existed of one of their encounters. In response, the PM went on national television and confessed to adultery, though the tape never did turn up. During the same spell in office, Netanyahu and his wife Sarah were suspected of pocketing gifts and foreign contributions from world leaders, items legally considered to be state property. The two were also suspected of accepting favors from a building contractor. Both cases were closed without charges. Netanyahu was suspected of double-billing travel expenses and using state funds to cover his personal travel during the 2000s, while he was finance minister and opposition leader. After a drawn-out investigation, the case was dismissed. In 2013, the PM came under heavy criticism for spending a staggering $127,000 in public funds on a special sleeping cabin he used during a 5-hour flight to London. An official expense report from 2015 revealed how Netanyahu and his wife spent more than $600,000 of Israeli public funds on a 6-day trip to New York, including $1,600 on a personal hairdresser. That same year, he also racked up a $2,700 tab at an ice cream parlor in West Jerusalem. While these incidents didn't lead to charges, they contributed to Netanyahu's scandal-tainted image. In 2019, 3 separate corruption cases were filed against Netanyahu. These included charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Netanyahu and his wife currently face charges of fraud and breach of trust. They stand accused of receiving lavish gifts like cigars, champagne, and jewelry worth $192,000 from billionaires Arnon Milchan and James Packer in exchange for political favors like tax breaks, contracts for illegal settler projects, and increased state support for their businesses. Netanyahu faces charges of fraud and breach of trust for allegedly making a deal with Yedioth Ahronot newspaper owner Arnon Moses in exchange for legislation to limit the growth of rival paper Israel Hayom. Finally, Netanyahu stands accused of granting regulatory favors to Israeli telecoms company Bezeq in exchange for positive coverage of him and his wife on a news website controlled by its former chairman. The benefits reportedly included mergers and financial gains. In this case, he faces charges of fraud, breach of trust, and bribery. According to critics, Netanyahu has leveraged his power to avoid accountability. He denies any wrongdoing and calls the charges an orchestrated coup attempt by rivals and the media to remove him from office. His allies like Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir remained behind him. He even went as far as pushing for judicial reforms to alter the relationship between Israel's parliament and its judicial system. The reforms would allegedly allow Netanyahu to influence judge appointments, which would potentially help him dodge convictions. However, the move caused the Israeli public to lose confidence in him and sparked nationwide protests, leading Israel's Supreme Court to intervene. Many critics say that Netanyahu used Tel Aviv's war on Palestine's Gaza as a way to delay his court proceedings. They argue that by prolonging the war, the PM distracted the public and media from his legal jeopardy. Netanyahu now faces possible prison time in Israel and arrest abroad over war crimes. After years of evading consequences, can he keep slithering away, or is this the end of the road for the scandal-ridden PM?
That was Sarah Netanyahu, or the most powerful hated woman in Israel. For those who may not know, Sarah Netanyahu is the third wife of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. She's also the daughter of Shimon ben Arzi, a Polish-born Israeli Jewish educator, poet, and biblical scholar. Most importantly, she's a trained psychologist, and it's doubtful that anyone would want to hear her yell it out again. So where does the hate come from? Let's start from the beginning, shall we? So Benjamin and Sarah got married in 1991. Who knows if it was love at first sight? But one thing's for sure, they make great partners in crime. Especially when it comes for that, for witcher vow. Here's some of the ugly details. This is David Chimerin, who happens to be Benjamin's cousin and former attorney. He reportedly drafted a 15-page secret agreement between Benjamin and Sarah in the 1990s, granting her some interesting executive powers, like having a say in national matters, including veto power. The agreement was reportedly signed after Benjamin came clean about his 1993 sex tape affair he had with a staff member, during which Sarah stood by his side. Thus, this perfect marriage was cemented through an agreement, one that Bibi called a gross lie, while Sarah denied having any behind-the-scenes power. By the look of it, it is indeed a partnership that extends to crimes against humanity. But I will get to that later. Their bond was strengthened through one scandal after another. And in Sarah's case, one temper tantrum after another. During Benjamin's first term as Israeli PM in the late 19th, Sarah was accused of extravagant spending of state funds, something the couple remain accused of. She faces criminal charges for sneaking $100,000 in catered meals from expensive restaurants into the Prime Minister's residence, while covering up the fact that she had personal cooks on the government payroll. These charges might have triggered some anger in her. Just thinking out loud. So, in 2010, a housekeeper accused her of being abusive, and the case was settled out of court. In 2016, another former housekeeper filed a lawsuit and was awarded $47,000 in damages over workplace abuse. Sarah? She was accused in a third case of abuse and threatening her staff and treating them like slaves. Seriously, Sarah? One notable accusation involved a claim that she hits maids with shoes. I have nothing to say to you, Sarah. Some people had worse to say on the matter. Sheldon Adelson, a prominent Zionist billionaire, called Sarah Netanyahu completely crazy. His words, not mine. Whereas Israeli journalist Ben Caspit claimed in his book, The Netanyahu Years, that Sarah has tendencies of psychopathy. She's the controller and he the controlled. Again, his words, not mine. In 2020, when thousands of Israelis were protesting against the Netanyahu government, Sarah stepped in to make more friends, calling the protesters hooligans who snort some stuff in an interview. But here's where it gets even juicier. During Israel's ongoing war on Palestine's Gaza, Bibi and then opposition leader Benny Gantz were finalizing the formation of a national emergency government until Sarah stepped in. She reportedly delayed the entire agreement because she didn't want Gantz in the coalition. Peace at home is peace in government, right? I guess. The hate for the Netanyahu family grew exponentially in March 2023, as thousands of Israelis were back on the streets, protesting against the government's plans to overhaul the country's judicial system. Sarah was getting her hair done in a salon in Tel Aviv. The protesters were outraged and began to chant, "The country is on fire and Sarah's getting a haircut." She had to be escorted away by the police. But thankfully, the protesters were most likely Jewish. So they were generally spared being labeled anti-Semitic, because we're living in times when spilling the truth about anything Israeli related can lead you to be accused of anti-Semitism. Anyway, according to Sarah, the media hides all the wonderful things that she does. But given what an exquisite career she's had, can she be called the most hated woman in Israel? Let's let Israelis decide.
To the brave people of Iran, and I have a message for them. Our fight is not with you. Our fight is with the brutal dictatorship that has oppressed you for 46 years.
Oh, how original. You might be wondering, why does this message sound familiar?
I have a message for the people of Lebanon. Israel's war is not with you. It's with Hezbollah. For too long, Hezbollah has been using you as human shields. I want to use this opportunity and speak to the people of Gaza. Heed the warnings of the IDF and the Israeli army. Leave your homes to the places where you were told to go. Leave. Don't stay there, because Hamas wants you to die. And you shouldn't die for Hamas. They don't care about you. But we want you to be safe.
That's because you've heard it before. This is not the first time Netanyahu has addressed the citizens of other sovereign nations. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has been doing this over the years consistently and strategically. His playbook is pretty much the same each time. Blame the terrorists, say you're bringing democracy, and frame yourself as a savior before launching devastating bombing campaigns, killing civilians, and wreaking irreparable destruction.
When Netanyahu addresses the citizens of other nations such as Lebanon or Iran, he's doing so for a number of reasons. I think he's engaging in what we would call psychological warfare, causing fear and anxiety among the people he's about to attack, to weaken them, to demoralize them, and turn them against their governments. But at the same time, I think he's appealing to Western leaders, to Trump and to politicians in America particularly, and the lobby, the Christian lobby. He wants to appear reasonable. He wants to appear caring, warning people. Therefore, he is not responsible for deaths and injuries caused by his actions.
But why is Israel democracy suddenly being violently exported to Iran without provocation? Because the real goal here is neither peace nor democracy. It's based on Eretz Yisrael, or Greater Israel, a Zionist fantasy of expanding Israel's 1967 borders way beyond what international law recognizes and into the sovereign territory of Israel's neighbors. An ethno-nationalist dream of a historic Jewish homeland stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates, regardless of who lives there today. It's not just a fringe idea, it has quietly shaped Israeli right-wing policy for decades and serves as the blueprint for occupation, invasion, and annexation. And Netanyahu seems to have emerged as the face behind this plan, with his actions aligning perfectly and destructively with this vision of territorial expansionism.
The Greater Israel Plan goes back to Theodor Herzl, to the very beginning of the creation of the Zionist movement. The idea that they would have Eretz Israel, this is the land of Israel. And the land of Israel, according to their calculations from the Bible and from their conception of what it was, stretched not just to the historic territory of Mandate Palestine and to what's now called Jordan, also to Lebanon and Syria and most of Iraq and part of Egypt. It even stretched up to part of Turkey.
And the way it's used today is to provide a religious justification for Zionism, for colonialism, for, if you like, Western imperialism in the Middle East. And it's an exclusive claim, meaning that they believe that the land was given exclusively to the descendants of Isaac as opposed to the descendants of Ishmael. Incidentally, Israel is also the only country in the world that's never defined its borders.
But where did the Greater Israel idea find its major backing?
Let's rewind to 1996, when a group of US neoconservatives, many of whom would later serve in the Bush administration, wrote a little policy guide for Netanyahu's new government. Its title, A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. This wasn't just a policy memo. It was a guide on how to take over the Middle East, with Israel as the dominant force, and everyone else preferably weakened, divided, and subservient to the US-Israeli realm. The Clean Break strategy had a few key takeaways. The first regarded Palestinians and gave them no land and no state whatsoever. And judging by the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the complete siege of the already occupied West Bank today, things seem to be going according to the paper's plans. The second strategy was for Israel to grow so powerful that the world can stand up to it. The goal was to make Israel immune to international pressure. So whether Israel is committing war crimes, building illegal settlements, or flattening neighborhoods in other countries, it doesn't matter. Israel is above the law. And while world leaders might condemn Israel's actions, no one will or can actually stop them. The third was destabilizing and weakening Israel's enemies, meaning pretty much all its neighbors. The plan specifically named Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, all seen as obstacles to Israeli regional dominance and therefore direct Israeli targets.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region.
The way it's played out is very, very simply that Israel's approach is what we would call the carrot and the stick. With Western support, particularly from US support, the carrot is used for countries like Egypt and Jordan, which receive significant amounts of funding from the United States, to buy them off from criticizing or pressurizing Israel. In fact, Trump quite recently has been trying to persuade Egypt and Jordan to take Palestinian refugees from Gaza, and has threatened to use the finance he presently gives as a leverage. Other countries get the stick. That's Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Yemen. They get the stick rather than the carrot, because Israel's agenda is basically to destroy or divide and rule around their neighbors. Historically, Israel has developed links with the royalists in Iran, the Copts in Egypt, the Phalangists in Lebanon, in order to destabilize and divide those countries it deems as a threat to its sovereignty and its territorial integrity and its designs to expand.
It took only days for Netanyahu to seize the vacuum after the fall of the regime of Syria's Bashar al-Assad. He used that opportunity to attack Syria, which was celebrating long sought-after freedom after decades of oppression.
This is a historic day for the Middle East. The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus, offers great opportunity, but also is fraught with significant dangers. This collapse is a direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah in Iran, Assad's main supporters. It set off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and its oppression.
Yes, cue the message of solidarity right before the missiles. Fast forward to June 2025, when Israel unilaterally attacked Iran, not because of any provocation or immediate threat, but because Iran stands in the way of total Israeli dominance in and of the region.
And let's remember also, of course, they've been occupying Syria, the Golan, since 1967. And in the dissolution of the government of Bashar al-Assad, they were able to push right into Syria, up to within 20 kilometers of Damascus, and so they have a physical occupation in the south of Syria and security control over a greater swathe of Syria. And just in the last few days, they've sent tanks further into Syria so they can place their air defences, whatever's left of them, nearer to Iran. So, of course, that's what they've always wanted to do.
They excuse Iran's nuclear ambitions, as Netanyahu has been rattling on about like a broken record for 30 years.
Iran will be capable of producing alone, without importing anything, nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
They're very close. They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace.
And naturally, no grand strategy would be complete without the support of key allies. Netanyahu has skillfully enlisted the United States to take on the frontline role, ensuring that when it comes to executing this contentious agenda, the heavy lifting is handled by those with the deepest pockets and the most powerful arsenal. The plan is not about defeating a certain group, country, or individual. It's about remaking the Middle East one clean break at a time, until there is no obstacle in the way of the realization of the greater Israeli project. So next time you hear Netanyahu addressing the brave people of a country he's about to bomb, remember, Israel's motive is not to liberate these people or bring them democracy. Rather, it's a broader and bloodier strategy, carried out in increments like a board game or chess.
that leaves nothing but death, destruction, and instability in its wake. And one big part of that clean break for a greater Israel plan that has been going very smoothly, the deafening silence and inaction of Western and Arab leaders, raising alarm that a darker future for the region lies ahead.
You might have heard about children in Gaza going missing, kidnapped by Israeli soldiers. It's so evil, it sounds utterly absurd. But Israel's done this kind of thing before. I'm talking about a mass kidnapping that happened when Israel declared itself a state, when thousands of children disappeared and never returned. But they weren't Palestinian, they were Jewish.
It started as a rumor. Later on, it became a myth.
What is considered to be one of the largest cover-ups in the history of Israel.
This horrific crime and its cover-up tell us everything we need to know about Zionism and the core philosophy that's connected to every other colonial reality in the world. Let me explain.
Israel's independence.
It's 1948. Zionist militias have just razed hundreds of Palestinian villages, displaced 750,000 Palestinians, and declared Israel a state. At this stage, there are about 650,000 Jews living there. A minority were Palestinian Jews who'd been living there for ages, but the majority were recent settlers who'd moved to Palestine as part of the Zionist project. And most of these old-timers, as they'd come to be known, were Central or Eastern European, or what's called Ashkenazi Jews. They pioneered the Zionist movement, made up the militias that orchestrated the Nakba, and served in Israel's first political parties and government. Now that they had succeeded in establishing a Zionist state, they needed to start filling it with more settlers.
They came from the displaced persons camps in Europe.
But all these European Jews weren't enough to colonize and work all the land that they had taken. If Israel wanted to be a viable state, it would need more Jews. So the Zionist entity had to look to the Arab world. See, there had always been Arab Jews living in Yemen, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, as well as in non-Arab countries like Iran and Turkey. But these Jews, Mizrahi Jews as they'd come to be known, came from a very different context. Ashkenazi Jews had been facing anti-Semitism, pogroms, and persecution in Europe for centuries, which is the environment that gave birth to the colonial Zionist project, and the feeling that there needed to be a Jewish homeland for Jewish safety in the first place. Mizrahi Jews, on the other hand, had been coexisting with their neighbors for centuries and were part of society. But the colonial creation of Israel ruptured these centuries-old relations, leading to Israeli rescue missions that airlifted them into the colony. And the story behind the huge covered-up crime this video is about starts with one rescue in particular. Operation Magic Carpet. Yes, that is the actual name.
Here is a place where a miracle occurred. 5,000 Jews escaping terror and slavery in the backward Arab state of Yemen.
Yemeni Jews weren't slaves. They were just poor, like most non-Jewish Yemenis were. In fact, Yemeni Jews had been living there for centuries and had chosen to move to Israel because they wanted to flee poverty and had bought into the biblical narrative. Meanwhile, in Israel, these Yemeni Jews were seen as unclean, primitive, backwards, and a threat to the European civilized image that Israel was trying to build. Ben-Gurion, Israel's prime minister at the time, had described Mizrahi Jews as rabble and would later say, "We don't want Israelis to become Arabs. It is incumbent upon us to struggle against the spirit of the Levant, which corrupts individuals and societies." But the Yemenis were still brought in. Why? One Zionist leader said that while Ashkenazi Jews were better suited for city work, Yemeni Jews would do well with agriculture because they, quote, need very little. They'd been tested already, decades before. Yemeni Jews had been brought in by early Zionist settlers when they realized they couldn't work the land well, and they had glowing reviews. Hence, Operation Magic Carpet. Israel took what was essentially the mass import of cheap labor and spun it into an Orientalist white savior story of rescue and redemption.
And with each step you pass from the dark ages to the present century, from bondage to freedom.
This racist, supremacist attitude Ashkenazis had towards Mizrahi Jews sets the scene for what happens next. These are the absorption camps where almost 50,000 Yemeni Jews were sent once they arrived in Israel. Tent cities with awful sanitation, where their belongings were taken, they were secularized, and forced to adopt new Hebrew names, abandon their languages and their culture. Ben Gurion said, "The aim of the government is to inculcate the Yemeni immigrant with Israeli values to the point where he forgets where he came from." So Yemeni Jews were seen as people who needed to be civilized into the Israeli way of being, but at the same time, as a people who would, quote, never fully achieve modernity. This turned them into infants in the eyes of the Ashkenazi absorbers, thus taking over every decision regarding Mizrahim and their children seemed natural. That brings us to the kidnapping. Between 1948 and the early 1950s, thousands of babies disappeared. This happened to lots of non-European Jewish families, but the majority were Yemeni. It happened in several ways. When Yemeni Jews arrived at the absorption camps, their babies were taken from them forcefully to structures called baby houses, under the pretense that these places were in better condition than the unhygienic camps. And from these baby houses, many children disappeared. Or they disappeared from hospitals when taken there for routine treatment. There were also cases of Yemeni mothers giving birth, their child being taken away by a nurse, and then never seen again.
ילדתי ילד, ילדתי חתול, עכבר, מה ילדתי? תראו לי אותו. למה אתם לא מראים לי כלום? גברת זרקנו. במילים האלה, גברת זרקנו.
Across each scenario, the story was pretty much the same. Parents were told their child had died, but were shown no body, no grave, and no death certificate.
בחיים שלי אני לא מרגישה שהוא מת.
Many of these parents believed that their children had not died, but had been taken away from them, and put up for adoption, or sold to childless Ashkenazi couples.
אמרתי לו, אוקיי, בסדר, מת, אז תני לי לראות אותו פעם אחת, וזהו. ללטף אותו, לעשות לו משהו. היא עושה לי לא.
For years, these families campaigned for the truth and for justice, but were met with claims of myth and conspiracy. Decades later, some people were able to reconnect with their missing children through DNA tests.
After years of research, he found his biological mother, who was told, he says, that he had died during birth. He never told his adoptive parents he knew. They were Holocaust survivors.
Eventually, testimonies from those involved surfaced. One former senior nurse testified that Yemeni parents were not interested in their children, and that they should have been happy that their child got a good education. Another nurse told a Yemeni woman, "You have lots of children. Why not let us take one of them?"
נלקחו שם ילדים לאימהות צעירות מאוד שבאו ללדת. פשוט נעלמו הילדים, הם הוזמנו.
There are plenty of damning testimonies gathered by an NGO called Amram that suggest that this was systematic and widespread. And yet, 3 different government commissions over the course of decades claimed that most children had died, and that there was no evidence the state was involved. During one of these investigations, requests for birth and burial records disappeared, reported to have been destroyed by fires or floods. That coincidence was not investigated, and hundreds of thousands of documents from that inquiry were then classified. Only in 2016 was this issue finally acknowledged at the state level.
White people met here colored people and were supposed to be the same nation. They saw them as a problem that needs to be solved, and part of the solution was to take the children out. They will have a better life. Their identity will not be Middle Eastern. They will be sort of Europeans with dark skin.
It's a horrifying story, but it's not unique. Colonizers across the world have done this. From Australia to Canada to Belgium to France, the forcible removal of children and their re-education is standard practice for colonizers. And it's because despite their distance and space from one another, all these places share one core philosophy: white supremacy. It doesn't matter that the Mizrahi Jews were also settlers there to colonize the indigenous Palestinian population. They weren't white, and that made them vulnerable to their own cultural genocide. The story of the Yemeni children speaks to the only core principle of Zionism that matters, that it is inherently racist and violent against Palestinians and Jews alike. Zionism was invented by victims of white supremacy as their own version of white supremacy, where they could hold top rank. This story is just one of many that shatter the myth of Israel as a utopia and safe haven for Jews. Mizrahi Jews were safe before, and endangered upon their arrival to the white supremacist colony that saw them as nothing more than a primitive labor force. And that's the other thing that needs to be mourned in this story, the identity of the Arab Jew. That's at the core of why they were looked down upon by European settlers, because before being Jews, they were Arabs. The word Mizrahi, meaning Eastern, only serves to cover up this reality, that these were Arab Jews who culturally, linguistically, historically, had more in common with the Palestinians they were colonizing than the white settlers they were doing it alongside, or under. And so a system was born to keep them subjugated and dilute them of their culture, so they'd be far removed enough to see Palestinians as more of the other than the European settler who had always seen them as inferior. And so when we hear stories about Palestinian children being kidnapped in Gaza, this is not surprising. This is the extension and continuation of a long-held policy that the Zionist entity was built on. There's more details to this story that I didn't get to. If you're interested in learning more, you can check out our Patreon for more information.
Gaza's streets have long been rendered rubble and dust. Majid al-Barim has little choice but to plough a wheelchair carrying his nephew through what's left of them. 9-year-old Jude is disabled and, like tens of thousands of other children in Gaza, starving.
We are slowly dying every day. No one could survive what we're living through in Gaza. I don't think anyone could bear this. It's been 2 years of war, hunger, killing, destruction, and displacement.
Pain here is everywhere and growing not by the day, but by the hour. After the bullets and bombs came the disease. Now it is the hunger that is destroying people young and old across this enclave. The few functioning soup kitchens with food are inundated with those desperate for any scraps they can get their hands on. Many of these pots, though, held out in desperation, will go empty again today. Bloated bellies on children are increasingly commonplace. Doctors, like those treating baby all day, say there is little they can do.
Our child, Orday, is an orphan, meaning he has no one to care for him. He came here to the Patients' Friends Association. We are trying to help him within the available capabilities as much as possible by providing milk and supplements. But due to the current situation, the supplements are no longer available.
The head of the WHO has described the situation as a deadly surge in deaths linked to hunger.
Since July 17th, severe acute malnutrition centers are full without sufficient supplies for emergency feeding. In 2025, WHO has documented 21 deaths related to malnutrition of children under 5 years old. Rates of global acute malnutrition exceed 10%, and over 20% of pregnant and breastfeeding women that have been screened are malnourished, often severely.
In a statement on Wednesday, 111 organizations said that mass starvation was spreading despite tons of food, clean water and medical supplies waiting outside Gaza. But the aid groups said they'd been blocked from delivering it. On Thursday, the European Commission said Israel had made some efforts towards improving delivery of aid, but the situation remained dire. Yet airstrikes on Gaza continue. Health officials said more than 100 had been killed in the last 24 hours as of Thursday morning. The Israeli military claimed its attacks had struck military structures. Amid the ongoing attacks on those queuing at the few food trucks arriving in Gaza, for many here, hope of survival is as scarce as the food. Joel Flynn, TRT World.
Okay, let's take a talk about anti-Semitism. This is sounding kind of weird, but I don't know why the voice changes sometimes between recordings, but hey, just what it is, right? So, timeline The Origins and Distortions of Anti-Semitism. German scholar, ding, 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 August Ludwig von Schugger introduces the term Semitic to describe a language family including Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, and Amharic, not originally intended as a racial or religious label. So, 1781 German scholar introduces the term Semitic. So, kind of interesting timeline, right? Kind of about the time they seem to have been taking over things. I think they were plotting their takeover for a long time, but then they made the official move during Gilded Age when they got rid of those people and took over those houses. But let me continue on. Pre-1800s, hostility towards Jews in Europe was based on religion, not race. Jews were viewed as heretics, not a biologically distinct group. Muslims also faced persecution, but were not radicalized as Semites. So, in 1879, Wilhelm Marx coins the word anti-Semitism, publishes The Victory of Germanism over Judaism, shifts anti-Jewish sentiment from religion to race, misuses Semitic to refer only to Jews, that they excluded Arabs and others in the Semitic language group. So, the term Zionism, January 1892, it was first used publicly. So, 1879, they coined anti-Semitism. 1892, the term Zionism is first used publicly. Nathan Burham, Austrian Jewish intellect, first publicly uses Zionism in Vienna. Focuses on Jewish national revival. Late 1890s, Theodor Herz populates Zionism, publishes Der Judgment in 1896, leads the first Zionist Congress in 1897, promotes political Zionism aimed at founding a Jewish state. 1880s to 1930s, just surprisingly, the rise of racial anti-Semitism. Jews were portrayed as a racial threat to national purity. Influences early 20th century scientific racism and eugenics. Lays the groundwork for Nazi ideology. 1933 to 1945, Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. Racial anti-Semitism formalized by the Nazi regime. Jews exterminated regardless of religious belief. Establishes anti-Semitism as synonymous with Jew hate. Anti-Semitism post-1945 starts the modern confusion. It becomes tied exclusively to Jews. The original linguistic meaning of Semitic includes Arabs and Ethiopians. They were disregarded and used politically to silence criticism. There's a whole group of people which are really Semitic, but for some reason that they don't really explain that well, they just decide, well, anti-Semitism means the Jews. So, don't know why that is, but victimhood as strategy in geopolitical leverage. The Holocaust suffering grants moral and legal protection. They granted laws, the Holocaust denial, weaponized to suppress dissent. Criticism of Israel equated with anti-Semitism. See, this is where it all got started, right? So you say anything about Israel, which is really the United States, you get called anti-Semitism. And another key fact I will throw into the pile here, who circumcises the boys? Well, Israel and the United States. Why does the United States do this Jewish habit? Well, because they are one and the same. So using political leverage like AIPAC, they secure large-scale foreign aid and diplomatic immunity. So the victim narrative strengthens the group identity. It justifies military operations as self-defense. It encourages siege mentality in policy and culture. So, Holocaust exceptionalism, recognized for industrial scale and targeting, shapes global human rights laws and education systems. However, often overshadows other crimes against humanity. So the church held on to that little Jewish lie until the 60s, right? And then they started with the Holocaust education. So early awareness, 1945 to 1959. After World War II, there was minimal public education about the Holocaust. Survivors were often silent due to trauma and lack of public interest. The Cold War shifted quickly to the USSR as the new enemy. Nazi crimes were known from the Nuremberg trials, but no broader education effort followed immediately. So the rise of Holocaust education. So survivors in the US, Europe, and Israel began speaking publicly, especially after the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem in 1961. I wonder why that was. The trial was televised globally, exposing younger generations to Holocaust horrors for the first time. Israel prosecutors emphasized Jewish resistance, challenging the myth that Jews went like sheep to the slaughter. So we have all these American Jewish organizations, the American Jewish Committee, AJC, Anti-Defamation League, ADL, or World Jewish Congress, WJC. These groups push for inclusion of Holocaust units in school textbooks, development of memorial days and museums, teacher trainings and curriculum materials, public policy support for educational mandates. So they certainly moved in with all of the Holocaust stuff, right? So early 1970s, teachers in places like New York and California began incorporating Holocaust lessons informally. First formal curriculum piloted in New York City was in 1973, and that was driven by local Jewish organizations and education departments. So 78, Carter establishes the President's Commission on the Holocaust. So yes, they really moved in, right? 1980, U.S. Congress approves the United States Holocaust Memorial Council. This eventually leads to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, opening in 1993. 1990 to the 2000, state mandates began requiring Holocaust instruction in public schools. New Jersey, California, and Illinois were early adopters. 2005, the United Nations designates January the 27th, which was the liberation of Auschwitz, as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So motivation behind the push: counter anti-Semitism, combat post-war denial and growing Holocaust triviality, identity and memory, preserve Jewish memory, and community cohesion. Moral imperative: educators and activists frame Holocaust education as a moral duty to prevent future genocides. Political legitimacy for Israel. Some education efforts also reinforce support for Israel as a post-Holocaust refugee for Jews. So yes, we can see it all coming. The Catholic Church revised its centuries-long charge against Jews in 1965 with that Nostros Aetate, prompted by Jewish scholars. Holocaust education began to emerge in the early 1960s, catalyzed by the Eichmann trial, survivor activism, and the efforts of Jewish organizations. By the late 1970s, U.S. presidents, Congress, and major nonprofits institutionalized Holocaust education nationwide. So the U.S. gives Israel military and financial support, roughly around $3.8 billion a year. U.S. routinely blocks the United Nations resolutions critical of Israel. Israel acts as a strategic asset in the Middle East. U.S. benefits from shared intelligence and covert operations. With the U.S. and Israel working together, they maintain plausible deniability for controversial action. Oh, it was Hamas that did it. Oh, no, wait a minute. It was Al-Qaeda that did it. Oh, hey, wait a minute. It was Syria that did it. Early 20th century, the 1917 Balfour Declaration, Britain supports a Jewish homeland. Under British mandate, Jewish immigration and land acquisition increased in 1917, like they're really gearing up, right? So, 1947 to 48, the UN partition plan divides Palestine. Israel declared in 1948. So, repeated wars, post-1948, repeated wars. They had the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, continued occupation, settlement building, and regional conflict. So I've talked about this in the past. It all got started around 1916 with secret British and French plans to divide the Ottoman Empire. So it betrayed promises to Arab allies. Well, now they're going to try to murder all their Arab allies, but hey, that's a subject for another day, right? It laid the groundwork for future instability. It established conditions favorable to Zionist settlement. So, transformation of the conflict. Pre-modern coexistence between Jews, Muslims, and Christians were already going. Zionism and Arab nationalism politicized and polarized the relationships. Conflict shifts from religion to land, identity, and sovereignty. So the United States, global power with a victim complex, the monster, global history of coups, military invasions, and resource exploitation. The victim, always framed as under attack, like 9/11 terrorism, justifies expansive military presence and surveillance. The result, narrative of victimhood deflects accountability, enables continued domination while preserving a morally righteousness. So, globally, the United States and Israel are working together to play this victim role, right? And also, this victim narrative gets used in other places like Russia. They justify invasions through self-defense rhetoric. China frames Western criticism as efforts to block peaceful rise. The UK and France defend colonialism as a civilizing mission. The U.S., unique in combining military, media, and moral framing. So what is a proxy state? A proxy state is typically a country that acts on behalf of or in the interest of a more powerful nation, relies heavily on that power for military, financial, or political support, may lose or limit some independence in foreign or security policy. Classic Cold War examples of proxy states. North Vietnam was proxy of the Soviet Union and China. South Korea was U.S. allied. Cuba was Soviet proxy. U.S.-Israel relationships key facts. The U.S. gives Israel approximately $3.8 billion per year in military aid under a 10-year agreement. Israel uses this support to maintain regional military dominance. See how it works, right? We're going to put them over there in Israel, and that way we can dominate that region. We can bully all those people, and now we can move them all out of the area. Once we get those pesky people in Gaza dealt with, then we're going to move into the rest of the area. Well, remember, all of your Middle East leaders have been converted to the U.S. side, so just pay attention to who's in charge of what, right? They always talk about running dual operations. I've read this quite often in CIA reports, how the U.S. sets up dual operations. What is a bigger dual operation than the U.S. and Israel, right? So the U.S. vetoes many UN resolutions critical of Israel. Strong lobbying organizations like AIPAC influence U.S. policy in Israel's favor. Intelligence and strategic partnership. The two nations share intelligence, weapons development, and cyber capabilities. Israel looks to act independently, but also aligns closely with U.S. regional interests, especially against Iran. Israel appears to make independent military decisions, such as operations in Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon, but Israel has sometimes acted against U.S. preference, but this is all part of the thing. So, is Israel a U.S. proxy? Not in the strict geopolitical sense. Israel is a sovereign nation with an independent military, intelligence service, and foreign policy. Like I said, just a dual part of the U.S., right? However, it is heavily aligned with and dependent on the U.S., particularly in terms of military aid, diplomatic cover, and strategic coordinates. So while not a proxy in the traditional sense, the term is sometimes used rhetorically to criticize the close and often one-sided nature of the alliance. So Israel is a close U.S. strategic ally that receives significant military, financial, and diplomatic support, but it remains an independent state, not a formal proxy. Well, I think we're just splitting hairs here, right? What are dual operations in intelligence? In intelligence terminology, a dual operation can mean this: a single initiative serving two agencies or governments, covert collaboration. A project with a public-facing mission and a hidden strategic purpose. An operation that has both defensive and offensive intelligence goals. A program or foreign policy that appears independent but is co-managed or influenced by another power. The CIA, particularly in Cold War and post-World War II context, has frequently run joint or dual-track operations, especially through proxies, cutouts, and friendly regimes. Israel as a U.S. dual operation, a reasonable hypothesis. While Israel is a sovereign nation, there is substantial evidence that it has historically functioned as a strategic extension of U.S. and previously British interests in the Middle East. Its military intelligence and economic infrastructure has been deeply funded and supported by the United States. There is a long-standing intelligence relationship between CIA and Mossad, sometimes cooperative, sometimes controversial, often opaque. Key founding figures of Israel. Ben-Gurion has strong ties with British and later American policymakers. So, from a geopolitical and intelligence perspective, one could argue that Israel operates as both an independent state and a strategic outpost, a dual-purpose asset for U.S. foreign policy and intelligence in the area. So, military aid. Israel receives the largest cumulative amount of U.S. military aid in history, over $146 billion since 1948. Technology transfer and intelligence sharing, joint development projects like the Iron Dome, missile defense, cyber warfare programs are often dual benefit. CIA and Mossad collaboration. U.S. and Israeli agencies have co-run operations via Stuxnet, operations in Iran and Lebanon. Cover for clandestine ops. Israel has allegedly been used in deniability ops in regions where direct U.S. involvement would be too politically risky. Political influence. AIPAC and U.S.-based Zionist networks influence U.S. policy in ways that blur national boundaries. Examples of dual shadow operations with Israeli involvement. The Iran-Contra affair. Israel played a covert intermediary role in arms transfers. Operation Cyclone in Afghanistan. Israeli arms through U.S. channels were funneled to the Mujahideen. Operation Gladiotize, some researchers argue that Israel was aware of or adjacent to NATO's stay-behind networks. Organ trafficking, spy tech sales, and psyops. Various scandals, like the NSO's group's Pegasus software, suggest Israel acts both actor and proxy. Why call it a dual operation? Because Israel can execute missions aligned with U.S. deep state goals under the cover of its own sovereignty. It can operate in the shadows of official policy, offering plausible deniability. Act covertly where the U.S. cannot or will not directly. Serve as a testing ground, serve surveillance, control systems, and warfare, and that's what's going on now. All the people they're murdering in Ukraine and in Gaza places, what happens is they use those places as testing grounds for these missions, and then they can claim, well, they're battle tested and get more money. So this is what it said. The framing of Israel as a dual operation of the U.S. is not without precedent in intelligence strategy. While officially an ally and sovereign state, Israel also functions as a proxy or instrument of U.S. intelligence and military aims, a collaborator in shared covert agencies, a buffer and projection point for American power in the Middle East. This duality is consistent with many post-World War II intelligence and foreign policy strategies, and in that context, this is operationally valid to call U.S. an ally. They're hooked together. So I've already gone through. Let me see. The U.S. officially recognizes Israel in 1948. CIA, Mossad foundations, quiet intelligence collaboration begins. That's in 48 to 50, with Israeli acting as Western ally in the region. 1960s, there was a Dimona nuclear facility. U.S. was aware of Israeli nuclear development, but publicly opposes it, but covertly tolerates it. There was a USS Liberty incident in 1967. Israeli attack on U.S. surveillance ship, publicly declared accident, privately handled to protect the alliance. 1970s, there was a Operation Wrath of God, which went from 1972 to 1979. Mossad's global assassination campaign post-Munich Olympics supported by U.S. intelligence. Still in 1970, Iranian arms transfer. Israeli acts as intermediary for U.S. arms to Iran, foreshadowing Iran-Contra. 1980s, there was Operation Opera. Israeli bombing of Iraqi nuclear reactor, quietly supported by the U.S. Jonathan Pollard spy case, 1985. Israeli spy inside U.S. Navy, strained relations, but cooperation resumed. Iran-Contra affair, 1985 to 1987. Israel used to funnel arms to the U.S. from the U.S. to Iran. I guess they really don't hate Iran so much, right? They were funneling weapons to them, okay? 1990s, Oslo Accords, intelligence support. CIA and Mossad share intelligence to control Palestinian resistance. Still in 1990s, a joint military and cyber research initiated, including development of missile defense systems. In 2000, post 9/11 intelligence sharing, Mossad provides insight on terror networks. U.S. adopts Israeli counter models. And keep in mind, the U.S. also sends cops to Israel to get more brutal training. So there's always that connection too, right? There's a Stuxnet in 2005 to 2010, joint U.S.-Israel cyber operations against Iran's nuclear program. 2010, NSO Group and Pendergrass, Israeli software allegedly used with U.S. awareness or cooperation in global surveillance. Training and tech transfers, U.S. military adopts Israeli counterinsurgency tactics, uses joint exercises intensified. 220s to present, Abraham Accords In 2020, intelligence groundwork by U.S. and Israeli reshapes Middle East alignments. AI surveillance and predictive policing. Israeli firms influence U.S. law enforcement tech, including via back channels. U.S. special ops and Mossad coordination in Syria and Iran. Frequent, unofficial coordination targeting Hezbollah and the IRGC asset. And keep in mind, Hezbollah is also the United States. So in Israel, we have the CIA, we have the Defense Intelligence Agency, we have the National Security Agency, we have the Pentagon, and we have the Department of State. Israel, they have Mossad, which is their foreign intelligence. They have Amman, which is their military intelligence. They have Shin Bet, which is their domestic security, Minister of Defense and Foreign Affairs. So yeah, they're always doing joint things. Israel functions not merely as a U.S. ally, but often as a strategic extension or proxy in dual-purpose intelligence and military operations. The relationship is embedded in both open alliances and covert intelligence cooperation, fitting the definition of a dual operation, publicly separate but operationally integrated. So, and they're also supporting Israel because they have this thing called the law of return. So, the law of return, which grants automatic citizenship to Jews worldwide, has been criticized for inadvertently enabling foreign nationals, including alleged or convicted pedophiles, to evade justice in their home countries by relocating to Israel. Activists and investigators have raised concern that this legal mechanism can be exploited to create a de facto safe haven, especially when extradition is delayed or denied. So yeah, they're letting all the pedophile files go into Israel to help the United States, right? So yeah, I have all of this down below. I have a ton of more information over on my website and down below. And yeah, so it was interesting though, because this national level Holocaust education, I'll close out with this. It actually started in it started in Poland in 1998. You would think that, and then it continued on in France, the Holocaust education in 1990, and it criminalizes denial of crimes against humanity as defined at Nuremberg, including Holocaust denial. So I guess I'm officially both a crazy person and a Holocaust denier here. So just put that on my list of things. Okay, so there are a lot of states here. Most of them have advocacy. They started out in Oregon, a little bit too boring to go into right now, but I got to tell you, if you're not trying to hide something, why do you have to have all of these laws, right? Why do you have to force this education? Why do you have to put people in jail if they talk badly about you, right? And I have a whole other list here of all the things they have shared, the intelligence things, starting, let me see here. Starting in 1946, they came up with that Five Eyes program. Yeah, they have been working together for a very long time. And keep in mind, 9/11 was in fact planned by the USA. So there were no foreign people in here. That was all a ruse to allow them to go and attack the rest of the Middle East. So, and why would you have AIPAC in this country strong-arming people into voting for people, right? And AIPAC was founded in 1951 as the American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs. Its role, it influences U.S. foreign policy toward Israel through lobbying, campaign donations, and advocacy. It secures billions in military aid to Israel. It pressures Congress to adopt anti-BDS legislation. It facilitates joint tech and cybersecurity ventures. It leverages think tanks like Washington Institute for Near East policy. They use shared interests with intelligence, close links with figures involved in defense, surveillance, and Middle East policy. So, yeah, I don't have anything saying that It doesn't look to me. It doesn't look to me, and I have a whole bunch more down below. You're welcome to explore it and hopefully make your own decision, but it appears to me that they're so connected that it's almost hard to pull them apart. And here's where we get interesting, okay? Why did a lot of the people who came into Israel to run things were not really from Israel, right? They changed their names, like Golda Meir. She was born in Ukraine as Golda Makovich. Benjamin Netanyahu, he was born in Tel Aviv, but his father was from Poland, and their original family name was Melachevich. Adopted Hebrew names as part of a wider Zionist practice of Hebraizing names to reinforce national identity and distance themselves from their dysphoria origins. So why did these Israeli people change their names? That guy named David Ben Gurion, his real name is David Grun. He's from Russia and now Poland. He was the first PM of Israel. He Hebraized the name to sound ancient Israeli. Golda Makovich Meir, she's from Kiev, Russia, now Ukraine. She migrated to the U.S. as a child and later moved to Palestine. Moshe Sharit was born in the Russian Empire, now Ukraine. He was the second PM. The name changed to sound more Hebrew. There was a person, Levi Escobar. He was born in Russia, now Ukraine. He was the third PM of Israel, changed the name in the 1940s. Then we have I can't pronounce these. Russian Empire, now Belarus. He was born into a Jewish family with ties to right-wing underground. Shimon Peres, born in Poland, now Belarus, former PM and president, cousin of actress Lauren Bacall. Hud Barak, that was the son. I mean, who was that person? I got to try to. I'm having some trouble with my eyes. He was the another son of Polish immigrants. Why are these Polish people in here? Ariel Sharon. I remember that name. Their original name was Kafar Makwepi. It's from Palestine. Family was from Belarus. Changed name to Hebrew version. Benjamin Netanyahu was Benjamin Mekawewski, born in Tel Aviv, Israel. Father, Benzion Mekawewski, was a Zionist historian from Poland. Menachem Begin, his real name was Menachem Begin. He was from Russia Empire, now Belarus. Kind of interesting, right? Belarus, Russia, Ukraine. Making Begin was, I always think of baking bacon, was originally, let's see, I gotta get serious here. Former leader of Urgu, changed name upon entering politics. Yatizi Rabin, no name change, but father was Rabisi Rakubiksi, was born in Jerusalem. Native born, but family originally from Ukraine. What's with all these Ukraine people? Chime Welltime. They did not Hebraize their name, but they changed it due to translation. They were born in, this was the first president of Israel, was born in Russia, now Belarus. Moshe Dayan, no major change, but family was anglicized before Hebraicized. His real name was, he was from Ottoman and Palestine. Iconic general, family from Ukraine originally. So why did they change their names? Well, because they were coming up with a whole new plot to get rid of the rest of us, right? Zionist ideology. Hebraization of names was encouraged to break the ties with Galut, which was a dysphoria past and embraced a reborn Jewish national identity tied to the Hebrew language and biblical imagery. Cultural assimilation of the Swedes, the pre-state Jewish community. Many immigrants from Europe wanted to integrate into a new collective identity, often under pressure from the labor Zionists or military institutions. Military and political reasons. Members of the underground militias often change names to evade British intelligence or to adopt militant alliances. Immigration optics, presenting Israelis' leadership as native-born or returning Hebrews, help solidify Zionist narratives of continuity, even when most were from Eastern Europe. So yeah, why is that? Why exactly did all those people from Eastern Europe just happen to go over there and to be in charge, right? So, what's going on with all this stuff? Well, here's what I think is going on. These people are psychopaths, and they use the idea of false victimhood. They always will come to you, and they will blame you for everything that they're actually doing. And what that does is that usually riles that person up. So if you walked up to me and said, "Hey, I think you're this, I think you're that, I think you're that," well, I might get quite offended, right? So in my getting offended, I might yell back and say, "What the hell are you talking about?" Well, what they do is they say, "Were you watching? Did you see how she reacted?" Now, who was innocent would act the way that she just acted. So what they do is they use it as a tactic to it's a pre-defense tactic. It's actually projection and gaslighting. It's emotionally hijacking you. And it's most importantly, the narrative control. And they're claiming the victim status while they're abusing others, using charm, deception, blame shifting, and lack of empathy. We have institutionalized psychopathy seen in governments, corporations, and intelligence agencies. Use of narrative inversion to evade responsibility and mask the abuse. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at psychopaths who took over a couple hundred years ago. They could not possibly have taken over before that time. They are falling to pieces right this second as we talk. So what I'd like to caution you on moving forward is try to use the right terms. We're all Semites, okay? I discovered through this whole thing that my father was likely an Arab. So we're all Semites, right? So to call somebody anti-Semitic just from some made-up term from some guy in Germany is in fact using the wrong message. It is the wrong information that was totally cooked up. So you have to ask yourself, why did they cook up this entire narrative? Well, narratives are about getting rid of the rest of us, right? They can't just one day run around and start slaughtering people. They have to declare war, right? And that way they can then run around and slaughter people. And I think it's as simple as this. They were sitting around in their little lair up in Germany somewhere, and they were saying, "Hey, how are we going to get rid of all those Muslims? Got to get rid of those Muslims." Well, I got an idea. Why don't we act like, let's come up with this Bible first. We'll come up with a Bible. We'll write this whole Jesus thing into Israel and stuff, and then we'll go over there and we'll figure out a way to grab that land. We'll claim it was ours. And from that land there, we can wipe out all the rest of them. A key strategic point for mass annihilation and genocide of the entire region, not just Gaza. Gaza is what they're focusing on right now. So be safe out there. Goodbye for now.